Thank you, Mary. As Mary said, I've been sort of working on the latest book, which is about talking with tech leads. And I think one of the sort of experiences I've had sort of working as a consultant is working with other lead developers like yourself and talking to them about their experiences of moving from sort of this place of being a developer to being a tech lead. And what's really interesting about this sort of journey is that you're probably not really prepared for it. So I think most people's experiences is that your world is generally about sort of code. It's about a sort of binary world of solving problems, dealing with new tools, new frameworks, and actually suddenly you have to think about all these things to do with people. And maybe it's not that extreme where you're still actually somewhere in the middle, and this is for me that sort of challenge of being a lead developer. And what I really love about this conference is this balance of topics. And I think for me, what's really interesting is about how you achieve this balance being a lead developer. And this is what I kind of talk about writing the paradoxes. And in this sort of talk, I want to explore what are the common things that you as a lead developer, maybe you're not quite there yet, or maybe you've not experienced all of these things, but after talking to lots of different lead devs, I'm going to explore some of the very common sort of paradoxes that you're going to have to face, and how you start to overcome some of these different things. And so the question is, well, what is a paradox? And I think one of the things that you'll find is that when you've worked in a sort of a binary world of solving problems, is that you have your sort of tests, right? It's either red or green. Things either work or they don't really work. And suddenly you have to sort of make decisions. And one of the things about paradoxes is that you have a choice. And what seemingly is a choice is that you have two things that seemingly are in contrast with each other. And these are the things that you kind of struggle with, is which direction do I need to go in? How much effort do I put in one place and the other? So let's take an example. The first one, and what I'm really excited about is sort of the next talk, which talks about how you stay technical, how you keep relevant. And at the same time, how do you enable people? So if you've ever been in this sort of role, you know yourself, it's the time that you sort of spend talking to people, working with your team, is the same sort of trade-off of time that you have to take when you're actually working with the code. And so how do you keep yourself fresh and relevant? I'm obviously not going to go into deep depth with this kind of problem because somebody else will be talking about this. But this is a very common paradox, and it's one of the first challenges that you'll have. I think what's really interesting is where we find comfort as being a tech lead, is that for the most part, Camille mentioned about the availability bias, is that we're comfortable in the world that we're used to. So we're really comfortable staying in this sort of staying technical world, and we're not so maybe comfortable dealing with people. Where before dealing with conflict in the team was somebody else's problem, you're responsible now for actually trying to resolve some of this stuff. And how do you actually find that balance? One of the other things is having pressure from the business, and how do you encourage that sort of atmosphere of learning? So if you take the sort of Google 20% time, and you're trying to encourage people to actually learn, give people space to actually stay sort of relevant, and actually keep up to date with some of those tools. But at the same time, you're still trying to focus on actually delivering value. And how do you actually find these balances? And every environment will be really different. So one of the benefits of working in a consulting environment is that you get to see lots of environments and lots of industries. And this is true of every sort of environment, is that there is always pressure in some commercial environment. Even in sort of government environments, there's pressure to sort of deliver to public policy, and also just keeping up to date with change. And so one of the paradoxes that you have to kind of find balance in is how do you actually balance these time to learn and then actually time to actually deliver this stuff. Delivering versus innovating. So there's one part about actually learning, but how do you spend time actually creating new ideas, creating new products? So one of my colleagues recently published the Lean Enterprise book. And what's really exciting about that is it's actually trying to align the idea of innovating within the sort of product space so that you can get the best out of your sort of people by aligning them with sort of business priorities. And it's not just about focusing on what somebody said, but where do new products come from? And I think people maybe have heard about the origins of Google Email and sort of different things where some of this stuff was actually a side project and it's turned into new products. And so some of this stuff can actually be done in conjunction with each other. But the challenge is always trying to find that time of where you give that space for people to innovate, and how do you balance that out with actually getting people to sort of deliver on what is requested in your sort of current environment. This one for me is a really interesting challenge. So if you are sort of leading the architecture for a system, one of the challenges that you have is maintaining consistency and encouraging improvement. So we have all kind of heard about the 3 strikes you refactor. And a lot of that is about trying to maintain consistency, because we know that extending new features, adding new sort of functionality is a lot easier if things are kind of consistent. If we have new people come on board and we have to sort of get them to start working with the code base, instead of having 12 different ways of actually doing something, it's a lot easier if they have that sort of one consistent way of doing things. But if we're actually going to try something new and we're going to change something and improve something, we're actually kind of introducing inconsistency into the code base. And so we have to kind of manage that and make sure that we have that right level of sort of inconsistency, and we're trying out new experiments and improving, but at the same time we're sort of maintaining the level of consistency that we want. A really good rule of thumb that I heard from somebody is that we don't try more than 3 different ways of doing things in the code base. So some of this stuff might take a lot longer, particularly if you're sort of working with a longer term system. And so, if we have 3 different sort of frameworks of something, before we try to add the 4th one in, we actually try to remove one of the other ones so that we are actually maintaining a certain level of consistency. Hopefully you don't end up with 3 different frameworks for something, but this is this sort of idea that somebody had around keeping a rule of thumb of guidance. This is really interesting when you're dealing with people, and I'll say from my own personal experience is you'll never get this ever correct. So one of the things about working in sort of organizations is that there's so many different messages coming at the team from lots of different ways. There's new directions about where the company is going to go. There's sort of new frameworks and new tools coming in from a technical side. There's all this sort of chaos of sort of what's going on in the sort of surrounding environment. And one of your challenges as a technical leader is that you want to keep people focused on the things that they're interested in. But what's interesting is what is interesting for somebody is not interesting for another person. And so you have a challenge of sort of protecting the team from certain amounts of information. And a sort of common situation a lot of lead devs find themselves in is that if they sort of are keeping sort of information at sort of bay to protect the team, it's very common for somebody in your sort of position to be accused of hiding information. And this is one of the challenges that you have to sort of cope with. It's not that you're trying to intentionally hide people or hide information from different people, but you're really trying to help people keep focused on what they need to do their job. But the challenge is that everyone will want to know different things about the organization. So I've been in teams where they've sort of talked about, well, why didn't I know that we were going to split organizations in 3 months? But actually that stuff wasn't actually decided, and that sort of stuff is kind of rumors. And so these are one of the things that you have to kind of manage, which is there's definitely the rumor mill around what news might actually become reality and what things are really interesting to people as well. At the same time as not trying to flood people with all of this amounts of information going on in the organization. And the hard thing about this sort of task is that it's not binary. You'll never get it perfectly right. So one of the rules of thumbs I have here is that you try to work out what information you want to sort of give people, but you also allow people the option of sort of pulling information when you want. So make sure that you're available to give dedicated time to people and let them ask questions. Create forums for people to sort of get the information they would like, but try not to sort of send them everything and forward everything on that you actually get in your own box. I think a lot of this stuff can also worry a lot of technical people as well, is that, I don't want to know about all this organizational stuff. I don't want to know about what's going on in other teams. I just want to focus on, doing the best job that I can in the code that I have. And so these are the challenges that you'll actually sort of face as part of this role. Oh, this is one of my favorites. So dealing with business needs and technical needs. I think one of the experiences that I've had sort of coaching developers into the tech lead role is sort of understanding that you need to actually champion the time that your team needs to get their job done. So it's like, oh, the business are always asking for new features. We have to deliver more stories, we have to do all of this sort of stuff. But at the same time, we need to take care of infrastructure, about our sort of CI servers, about automated tests. But the business never gives us time for that. And my first question to them is, have you asked for it? And this is where we, as sort of lead devs, need to actually make sure that we're also championing the internal needs of the technical team outwards to the rest of the organization, and make sure that it's in balance and in alignment. So yes, we're going to spend some more time using Docker to create automated infrastructure to make our deployments easier. But the idea is that that will actually help us deliver with business needs a lot later. So we, as tech leads, need to actually champion for these sort of technical needs, because our business people don't know about this sort of stuff. And if we're not asking for that, nobody will actually ask it from a business side, and it'll never get prioritized. So what is seemingly a sort of paradox in the time that we spend is that if we deliver technical things and not business things, these things are opposed. Actually, we can find ways of keeping these things in alignment. So what is apparently a paradox? Things that seem mutually exclusive. I take this actually from Jim Highsmith's adaptive leadership idea of paradox writing. And the trick with being the sort of adaptive leader, particularly from a tech lead sense, is understanding not making the choice between one or the other, but it's actually making a choice and actions that allow you to do both at different times, and maybe both at the same time if you can. And so I want to kind of talk about a couple of different techniques that I find actually help people when they're thinking about the paradoxes and challenges that they're actually facing in their sort of lead developer role. The first one is, it's a very lonely role, but you aren't alone. So you may be the only lead dev on your team, and you may be struggling to think about, how do I approach these particular paradoxes? How do I find time to stay technical and yet sort of deal with the sort of team that I have? But the good thing is, look around you. You have about 250, 300 people in the same position as you, maybe in a different context, but you are not alone. So find your sort of support structure within your own organization. And the great thing about sort of larger organizations is you have other people right around you who are in similar roles in the same organization. So one of my favorite sort of activities that I encourage people to do is sort of a tech lead lunch. And you sort of get people to sort of get together, talk about things that are burning issues for your sort of role. How do I approach this particular situation with the team that I have? What sort of opportunities do you think I have given my sort of situation? And bounce these ideas off each other. If you're not in a larger organization with more sort of tech leads to sort of bounce ideas off, what I'd suggest is finding a mentor. So somebody that you can sort of bounce ideas off and sort of get that same sort of feedback. So make sure that, if you're in a startup and you're the only sort of tech lead, find somebody who is maybe a counterpart in an external startup. And this is where, we're really lucky in London in that we have such great richness of sort of user groups, the locality of everyone getting together. There's something on pretty much every night. And you can find people like this. And even when you're not, the magics of Skype and Google Hangouts and FaceTime these days means that people aren't that far away. So find your own support network to talk about these paradoxes. Find options about how other people approach these problems and how you might actually get the benefits out of this. Number two is actually understanding that the problem with the lead developer role is that we have to be uncomfortable, or we have to be comfortable with uncertainty. So one of the things that I found out in sort of talking with lots of technical leads is the fact that everyone deals with these paradoxes. So it's a common thing that everyone has to face. And that it seems unnatural because when we're dealing with computers give us that binary yes or no sort of answer. But actually, when you deal with people, you never get that perfect answer. And actually, one of the best ways that you can do that is find ways of getting feedback, what Camille was saying, around getting that feedback loop around what's actually happening. So, don't wait 3 months until you actually start talking to people in your team about, are they getting the information that they want? Have weekly sort of catch-ups with people and test the waters to make sure that you're sort of on track. And so there's definitely an iterative way of thinking when you're actually approaching this role and dealing with paradoxes. Things with dealing with sort of technical debt and doing some metrics around your code base to work out, are we heading in the right direction, or are we accumulating even more sort of technical debt as we go? Are we actually getting balance around this sort of stuff? And it's okay if you don't get it right, because what's really exciting about this sort of stuff is we have our team around us to help us sort of steer things in the right direction as well. So if we can sort of multiply our own impact, we're not the only people who have to deal with this sort of uncertainty. And yeah, I think the key thing here is really finding your feedback loops. The final thing is really thinking about don't take a binary approach to things. So one of the sort of things that we often think about is, should we do A or B? These are things that are sort of mutually exclusive. And really what we should be thinking about is, can we do two things at once and achieve the same sort of goal? So when I was talking about, can we work on sort of technical infrastructure that has benefits to the business and sort of win both things at the same time. So we start exploring about and terminology rather than or. Another key word to watch out for is the word but. So we want to look at and thinking rather than but thinking. And that really helps us in sort of uncovering these paradoxes. So the challenges of a lead developer, there are many, but I think one of the exciting things about this role is that you have a lot more impact when you're actually getting these paradoxes and dealing with these paradoxes correctly. And I think that benefits everyone. It benefits you from being a sort of lead of having more influence and more impact and producing a better result. And at the same time, it helps the people in your team. So I know that when I've been a sort of developer, before I sort of stepped into this lead dev role, I question, well, why isn't it why isn't it easier for me to do the things that I can do? And the thing is, when we actually manage to ride these paradoxes as lead devs, we get to create the environment that is most ideal for developers to work in, to help them be the most productive. And I think this is the most exciting thing about this role, is that we can sort of multiply our efforts, not through just ourselves, but through our team as well. And this is the exciting sort of part of it. So to recap what those sort of 3 tips were, is you're not alone. Find your support network, find other people in the same role, and bounce ideas off them about how they would approach things. Find your own sort of feedback cycles, and make sure that you're getting constant feedback from lots of different sources about whether or not your paradoxes are in balance or not. And make sure that when you're actually dealing with each paradox, you're not taking a binary approach. So we're looking for options that satisfy both conditions as much as we can, and we're spending time and finding that balance between each of those different paradoxes. So, thank you.